On today's episode, will Carter Yakemchuk be available for the Blackhawks at number 18? I'll answer that, and we'll get into Arvid Soderblom's report card.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, just a quick reminder to everyone watching on YouTube right now to hit that like button for me. Comment down below as well as to your thoughts on defenseman Carter Yakemchuk, whether you think he'll be available for the Blackhawks at number 18, and also the grade that you would give goaltender Arvid Soderblom for his performance this season. Make sure you're subscribed to the Locked On Blackhawks YouTube channel as well, because you're not going to want to be missing out on all the fun Blackhawks-related conversations I'll be having throughout the course of the summer. And coming up starting next week, I'll be diving into my Chicago Blackhawks Summer 2024 Top 10 Prospect List. You're not going to want to miss out on that, so make sure you're subscribed to the channel. And last but certainly not least, got to let you all know, today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel. Sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockdown to get $150 worth of bonus bets guaranteed. All right, good morning, everyone. Again, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. To kick things off here today, it's time to get into another top defenders draft profile here in the offseason. And for those of you who aren't already caught up on all of my draft profiles, or maybe you're even someone who's just checking out the channel for the first time, I've already covered notable blue liners such as Artem Levshinov, Zane Parekh, Anton Salayev, Zeev Buium, and most recently Sam Dickinson. Go and check those episodes out if you haven't caught them yet. You can easily find them under the 2024 Draft Profile playlist on my YouTube channel. Everything is time-coded down in the description as well to make everything easier for you. But today, the man I'm going to be covering is none other than big right-handed defenseman Carter Yakemchuk, 6'3", 200-pound right-handed defenseman who turned 18 all the way back in September. So just a couple of days shy of being in last year's draft class, actually, and is one of the older prospects in the 2024 class. Something to keep in mind just a little bit, as he is, nearly a full year older than Sam Dickinson, who I covered on Wednesday, 9 months older than Sam Dickinson, but regardless, still had a phenomenal season in the WHL for the Calgary Hitmen, tallying 71 points in 66 games. But how about these numbers, Blackhawks fans? 30 goals out of Carter Yakemchuk this year. Yeah, that's right. Zane Parekh wasn't the only blue liner in this class that hit 30 goals. Carter Yakemchuk did it as well in the WHL, while also chipping in for 41 assists. Those 71 points ranked 5th among all WHL defensemen this year. He led all of them in goals and was just one of two that hit the 20-goal plateau in the WHL. The season had a pretty handed margin over anyone else. So he's a goal-scoring defenseman. That's kind of his bread and butter. But we did get to see some nice little development out of Yakemchuk in his third WHL season, as he tallied 47 points in 67 games the year prior. So nice little development to get up over a point per game for a team that really struggled offensively this year in the WHL. And quite honestly, had he played for a better team, I think those assist numbers would have been much better. And I think that's also a reason why he scored so many goals, is because he kind of knew he had to take matters into his own hands. But a very good offensive-minded defenseman who's already played 3 years, got 3 years of junior hockey under his belt already. Getting into the rankings, though, it's interesting here for Carter Yakemchuk. Some people have him higher than others. Some people have him as basically the clear-cut 6th defenseman in this year's draft. Yakemchuk's ranked 18th by Elite Prospects, 12th by Bob McKenzie, 11th by Craig Button, 25th by Tony Ferrari, 11th by McKean's Hockey, 10th by Chris Peters, 13th by Daily Faceoff, 5th by Sportsnet. That's the highest ranking, but then we get ranked 24th by Dobber Prospects. So some people have Yakemchuk going around number 10, 11, or 12. Some people think he could fall back closer to number 20, and a couple even think he could be available into the 20s. So should be very interesting to see where he winds up going, although big right-handed defenseman with a shot like he has, those are always attractive to NHL clubs. So I really don't think he's going to be available there into the 20s. But breaking down Yakemchuk's strengths and weaknesses, His biggest asset, I think, absolutely is the shot that he possesses. And I think he does have elite goal scoring abilities for a defenseman because he can score at all levels as a blue liner. He can score with a booming slap shot from the point. He's got really good power there. He can also beat you with his snapshot. And I think this is actually the best release that he has is his wrister and snapshot, because he's got this deceptive little curl and drag maneuver that he uses to kind of fool goaltenders and fool shot blockers. He's able to drag the puck past those guys and get the proper angle on the goaltender. And he's got some really good accuracy as well. Not Zane Parek's accuracy, but good power and pretty good accuracy as well. And he's also someone who, as I mentioned, kind of had to take matters into his own hands for the Calgary Hitmen this year. He can kind of score like a forward. Like if he gets a one-on-one going in the offensive zone, he's not afraid to try and razzle-dazzle you, and he can score goals in a lot of different ways. So a high-level scoring offensive defenseman, and he also pairs that with really amazing hands and solid puck control. Again, I don't think it's quite Zane Parek's level of puck control, but he's got some phenomenal hands, man, and he'll dazzle you out there. He can dangle through defenders. He's got some really good dekes, and also he's very shifty out there too for a guy of his size. Can kind of dance through a few players, and I do think he has good enough puck control that'll help in his transition ability and puck carrying ability at the next level. I really see his puck control skills along with his athleticism out there. He just kind of looks like a true athlete for a guy of his size. I definitely think those are both strengths of his that'll help him develop at the next level. As far as his skating goes, he doesn't have the best acceleration or the best skating form, but he does have some decent edge work. He does have okay crossovers, and also his top speed is good. It takes him a little bit longer to get there than others, but his top speed is good. It just takes him a little bit longer to get there. But he's got good passing skills. He's a good skater. I wouldn't say he's like an elite playmaking defenseman. I think he's going to be more of a goal scorer than a playmaker at the NHL level. But like I mentioned earlier, had he played for a better team, I absolutely think he could have put up 50, 55, maybe even 60 assists in the WHL this year, because he is a good passer. He is capable of reading defenses really well and drawing defenders toward him and in order, to open up passing lanes for his teammates, and he recognizes those really well. So I do think, some people probably look at those 41 assists in 66 games this year and go, hey, does he really have upside as a passer or a puck mover? I do think there's more in his arsenal than those numbers suggest, and I think the numbers would have been better had he have been on a better team. And then defensively, he's very physical, good along the boards, and loves to throw his weight around to separate players from the puck. And that's what I absolutely love about him. He knows that he can use his size to his advantage, and he isn't scared to do it. And out of all the big defensemen that I've covered in this year's draft, I think Carter Yakemchuk shapes up to be the most physical one. Like, he stands up at his own blue line really well, and if you have your head down, he's going to run right through you. He's also really physical and engaged against the boards. Capable of boxing out defenders in front of his own goaltender. So he's got a lot of good traits and skills. I think his shot, his puck control, stick handling, top speed, physicality, and compete level are all strengths of his. As far as the weaknesses, he takes some gambles from time to time and thinks offense first, or at least he did for his team. And that's, again, something that you got to take with a little bit of a grain of salt. And you always kind of got to do when you're talking about an offensive defenseman at 17 years old, right? But considering he had to kind of take those chances and take those gambles to help Calgary score enough goals to win games, you kind of have to keep that in mind. But just his decision making, I think, can kind of use some work, and sometimes he can let his man get behind him. He can give up some unnecessary odd man rushes and get lost in coverage, puck watching from time to time. Just typical things in terms of having to round out his consistency on the defensive side of things. He also absolutely needs to work on his acceleration and his skating form a little bit to help him get to that top speed faster, because there are guys who are just going to blow by him in the NHL with that lack of acceleration. And also, like I said, I'm not sure he has true top pairing playmaking skills. I think they're maybe better than what people give him credit for, but I do believe he's going to be more of a goal scorer than a playmaker. He has to work on his first pass out of the defensive zone, and can also from time to time be guilty of trying to do too much, trusting his stick handling a little bit, and trying to dance through two or three guys. You're really not going to be doing that at the NHL level. So just need to recognize the simple plays out there and just work on overall consistency away from the puck a little bit. Also, sometimes he can take some bad penalties. His decision-making, like I said, isn't the best yet, but I personally would love to see a guy be more aggressive and take too many penalties than someone who isn't engaged and scared to block shots or doesn't have that compete level necessarily. I'll take what Carter Yakemchuk does and tries to run through you, and we'll work on the decision-making later. I take that aggressiveness over a lot of other guys' mentalities. So, all in all, I really do like Carter Yakemchuk's game. I do think he probably goes behind all 5 of the other defensemen that I've already covered. But again, you never know because the NHL loves big right-handed defensemen who have a powerful shot. You just don't really get many of those high up in the first round in many drafts. So I do ultimately think, though, he's going to be either the 4th or the 5th defenseman off the board and probably goes somewhere between, I don't know, numbers 11 or number 16 in my mind. I think he's going to be a good player, though. I think he does have a very well-rounded skill set. The goal scoring is his best attribute, so I don't know if he's ever going to be like a true top pairing guy. I feel like he has second pairing written all over him, but does have like a 1B upside if you can put the right defensive partner alongside him and he can round out his game a little bit more. And I do think he could be a power play specialist because of the powerful and deceptive release that he possesses. As far as a long-term fit for the Blackhawks, I actually think it could be a really good fit for the Blackhawks. And let's say Yakemchuk makes it to number 14 or number 15. If I were Kyle Davidson, I would certainly start kicking some tires because I do think his size and his well-rounded abilities like mesh with what the organization wants on their blue line right now. And I know I've mentioned that if the Blackhawks do take a right-handed defenseman, I think they want someone who's a little bit more trusted on the defensive side of things. And I mentioned Yakemchuk is more of an offensive-minded defenseman, but I do think he shapes out to be a good defender at the next level. Maybe not an elite one, but he's got some good size, and there's a lot of attributes to like about his game. The thing about Yakemchuk is it also depends if he falls, who else falls with him? Because let's say Cole Iserman falls out of the top 10 or falls out of the top 11. Berkeley Catton somehow, some way falls out of the top 10. Even if Sam Dickinson falls out of the top 11 or top 12, I think I personally would rather trade up to get those guys. I do have Yakemchuk a little bit behind them, but let's say they're all off the board at number 13 or 14 and Yakemchuk's just hovering around there. I would be all for Kyle Davidson making a move because I don't expect him to be available at number 18. Just again, given how much NHL franchises love big right-handed defensemen, how many franchises could use that in their prospect pool, I just really don't see him falling to 18. But, you know, I said that same thing about Oliver Moore at number 19 last year. I didn't even cover his draft profile because I assumed he would never fall out of the top 10. So crazy things can happen at the NHL draft. We'll see where Carter Yakemchuk winds up sorting out with all of the rest of the top defensemen in this year's class, but that's going to take care of Carter Yakemchuk's 2024 NHL Draft Profile. Go and let me know down in the comment section. Do you feel the same way? If Yakemchuk's available at 15, would you go and trade up for him if you were general manager Kyle Davidson? And also your thoughts on Carter Yakemchuk's game as a whole. Make sure to go and let me know about all of that down below in the comment section right now. But don't go anywhere because coming up in just a moment here, I do still have to get into 24-year-old goaltender Arvid Soderblom's report card. But first, I got to talk to you all about the fine folks over at FanDuel. It's playoff time in both the NBA and the NHL, and baseball is also back and in full swing, and FanDuel is your perfect place to bet on every single game. And right now, new customers get $150 worth of bonus bets guaranteed. Yes, you heard me right. That's $150 worth of bonus bets, win or lose. And you can bet on everything with these bonus bets, from slap shots throughout the Stanley Cup playoffs to home runs across all the great ballparks, slam dunks en route to the NBA championship, or even betting on UFC 302 this Saturday night. I personally am going to be betting on my boy Islam Makhachev by decision, -120. Go and check it out right now at FanDuel.com, an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. And if you're a new customer, go and make your first bet an automatic win at FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Again, that's FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get $150 worth of bonus bets guaranteed if you're a new customer. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, segment 2, only a couple more report cards to get into here before I kick off my Chicago Blackhawks Summer 2024 top 10 prospects list here next week. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, considering how deep the Blackhawks prospect pool is, how many names they have in their prospect pool, I think I went through a bunch of honorable mentions last time I did this list. Maybe I'll even do a top 20 because there's so many names in there. Now, I don't know exactly how I'm going to go about that, but you're not going to want to miss out on that. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you haven't done so already. Today, though, the next report card that I'm going to be getting into, I believe I only have one or two more after this one, is 24-year-old goaltender Arvid Soderblom. And listen, I know the season didn't go as we had hoped for Arvid Soderblom, as the Blackhawks organization had hoped, as Arvid Soderblom himself had hoped. But I do think there are some important things to remember here about his first season in the NHL. Yes, it was his first year as a full-time NHLer, only his third year over in North America. And again, he's still only 24 years old, which is, as a reminder, is still very young for a goaltender. This is a position that you really can't put your finger on and say, this is the development plan, because everyone develops different. It's just one of those positions where you need reps, and you need reps in high quality leagues against high quality players. And you just don't really get that all that much as a goaltender consistently. So that's why, Adam Guyan is going to be on this long path. He's going to Minnesota Duluth as a freshman only this fall. I expect him to spend at least 3 years there, probably. So I think it's important that we keep in mind that Arvid Soderblom is still a young goaltender, and this was his rookie year in the NHL. And also, we all felt like, I think for the most part, felt like it was time for Arvid Soderblom to take that leap, right? After Alex Stalock got let go in free agency last year, the Blackhawks elected not to bring him back. It was time for Arvid Soderblom to come up to the NHL level and be that backup. I don't think anyone really had gripes with that decision because, the first 2 years with Soderblom in the organization were pretty solid, especially his first year here, man, down in Rockford. I remember watching that playoff series against the Texas Stars. He was absolutely standing on his head, and I was like, whoa, we might have a little bit of a hidden gem here in net. His second season wasn't as strong, although he was kind of caught going up and down between Rockford and Chicago. If you all remember correctly, both Alex Stalock and Peter Mrazek were hurt at the same time, so Soderblom had to come up to the NHL a little bit early, put up some pretty ugly numbers, but went back down to Rockford and had a pretty steady season, played some postseason games for them, and played well in that matter. And I think we all agreed for the most part, it was time for Arvid Soderblom to come up and be the backup. And another thing you got to remember is the team in front of him. And I will say, it wasn't pretty regardless, but he did win 3 of his last 9 games. I thought he was better down the stretch. And also, the team in front of him was just not good whatsoever. This was a disastrous Blackhawks defense. And also, it was the worst offensive team in franchise history, worst offense in the NHL. So, look, was Arvid Soderblom Peter Mrazek? No, absolutely not. And that was very evident every time we got to watch him. But I do think it was just a very tough situation for a young goaltender to be in, considering he basically had to be perfect to go and win games. I mean, that's like what Peter Mrazek had to do for this Blackhawks team to win. And, the unfortunate part about Arvid Soderblom's season, the real concern is there was no consistency, like until those final 9 starts. The first 5 months of the season basically were pretty much a disaster for him. And it felt like every night he would give up at least one softie. And again, with the Blackhawks offense struggling so much, they just couldn't afford to give up one softie if they wanted to win games. So in my opinion, Arvid Soderblom's struggles this year, they do need to be taken with a little bit of a grain of salt. But at the same point in time, there is no denying this season was an absolute big-time disappointment for him, a big-time disappointment, I'm sure, for the Blackhawks organization. But I still wouldn't write him off just yet. He's got 1 year left under his contract. Am I discouraged? Am I concerned? Am I worried that he's not going to be an NHL caliber goaltender? Yeah, absolutely. Way more concerned than I was a year ago, but I'm not going to write him off completely because he's only going to turn 25 at the start of the season. And I do think with the position the Blackhawks are in, not quite being ready to take that next step and get into the playoffs, I think it's worthwhile to keep Arvid Soderblom around just to see if he does have any sort of bounce back and changes anyone's opinions moving forward. It's not like we're going to be wasting anyone's time in a season where we don't expect the Blackhawks to be all that competitive. But diving into the numbers for Soderblom, again, there's no denying they're absolutely ugly. He was one of the worst goaltenders in the league, but again, in a very tough position. 32 games played for Soderblom this year, started 29 games. Probably hoped that he would have started more than that, but Luke Richardson just really had to ride Peter Mrazek because he was so good and also was so much better, clearly, than Arvid Soderblom. In those 32 games, Soderblom amassed a 5-22-5 record. Those 22 losses were 10th in the NHL, despite him being just one of two goaltenders in the top 10 in losses with less than 40 appearances this season. Also had an .879 save percentage, which was the second worst in the NHL among goaltenders who made 20 starts. He had a .392 goals against average, which was the highest among all goalies with more than 10 games played. Only churned out 10 quality starts with a .345 quality start percentage. Goals saved above average, -23 for Arvid Soderblom this year, one of the worst in the entire NHL, and an even strength save percentage of .888. You compare that to Peter Mrazek, he had a save percentage at even strength above .910. Breaking down the good and bad here for Soderblom. As far as the good, there's kind of a part of the show where you could get the cricket noise going because there's not a whole lot to say here that went good for Arvid Soderblom this year. I will say, though, I was impressed with his composure for how poorly and disastrous things went. Like, he didn't really ever seem like he was too down on himself, and I'm sure he was having battles mentally, and I'm sure it wasn't easy for him, but he never lost his head or lost his cool with the media or anything. He stayed as collected, I think, as he could have in that situation. And I have to give him props for that because a young goaltender at his age, 24 years old, kid's younger than me by a couple years, like, I could think about all the things I could have done wrong in that situation, and he didn't. And again, I thought his final 9 starts finished the season on an ugly note, giving up 5 in his final 2 games, but had been playing some better hockey prior to that, winning 3 of his last 9 games. As far as the bad, yeah, it's pretty much everything you could put about a goaltender here. I think the poor rebound control was really evident. He let in softies, like I said, at least one basically every night, and the Blackhawks just couldn't afford that. I also thought his positioning compared to Peter Mrazek was pretty night and day, and I still think he has work to go in that department to just kind of settle in, simplify his game, make things as easy on him as possible. I just felt like he was in scramble mode a lot this year and losing his net, sliding side to side, giving up a yawning cage. Just wasn't as composed and stayed in gear, stayed locked in as Peter Mrazek did all year long. And just like I said, needs to have a solid offseason here, needs to round out his game if he wants to prove to the Blackhawks organization that he can still be part of this rebuild here moving forward, and also to other NHL clubs that he is capable of playing in this league. So it needs to be a big offseason, a big summer, and a big training camp for Arvid Soderblom, because the number 2 job for the backup behind Peter Mrazek in Chicago is wide open right now. I know Jackson Stauber is set to be an RFA. I personally would like to see him back and maybe give Arvid Soderblom something to think about here in the offseason. And if neither of them look capable during training camp, maybe try and claim a goaltender off of waivers, an NHL veteran who can back up Mrazek or something along those lines. But there's options here for the Blackhawks in goal. I still, though, would not completely write off Arvid Soderblom because it was just his first NHL season and he's only 24. As far as the grades go, though, yeah, I don't think I can give him anything other than an F. And I want to defend him, and I try here a little bit to give him the benefit of the doubt, but it's still an F, man. I don't think there's any way around it. And all the fans felt the same way for the most part. 76% of you voted D/F. That was the most popular vote. The next popular was 21% voted for C, 3% voted for B, and then a whopping 0%. Not a single person out of the 300 people that voted on this poll voted for A. I think that tells you how frustrating of a season it was for Arvid Soderblom. But again, if you didn't get to vote on this poll on X, make sure you go and follow at Talkin' Hockey so you can vote on the final couple of polls that I'm going to be doing here before I wrap up my report card, my Blackhawks report card segment for the summer. And yeah, that's going to wrap up Arvid Soderblom's 2023-2024 report card. Coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, I do still have to get into Zach Sanford signing a 1-year deal. Big time news coming out of Chicago. back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Again, just a reminder to everyone out there to hit that like button, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much. And also, make sure to go and check out the new Locked On Sports Today, because Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering all of the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. So make sure to go and check out Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, segment 3, not the biggest news in the world here, but I mentioned on the last episode when talking about Martin Misiak signing his 3-year entry-level contract. The Blackhawks made 2 signings on Tuesday afternoon. Well, the second one, and the one that I was saving to break down on today's show, was Zach Sanford returning, signing a 1-year, 2-way contract extension through the end of next season with a $775,000 cap hit. A second-round pick for the Washington Capitals over a decade ago, back in 2013, 61st overall. Only wound up playing 1 season there before getting traded to the St. Louis Blues as part of the Kevin Shattenkirk trade. But since then has kind of bounced all over and hasn't been able to kind of found a home. He played for the Ottawa Senators, the Winnipeg Jets, the Nashville Predators, and most recently the Arizona Coyotes. But back in the fall, when the Yotes tried to put him through waivers and send him down to the Tucson Roadrunners, the Blackhawks, who were absolutely injury depleted at that time, scooped up Sanford on waivers. And the 29-year-old went on to play in 18 NHL games for the Blackhawks last year, tallying 4 assists. And he also tallied 6 points in 13 games worth of action, 3 goals and 3 assists for the Rockford IceHogs in the AHL also. So yeah, this isn't a signing that, is really going to get the attention of anyone other than us Blackhawks fans, but I actually like the idea of bringing back Sanford, to have a guy who very unlikely is going to make this Blackhawks team out of camp. I mean, he needs to absolutely light it up and impress more than some of these young guys do, which I think is very unlikely. The Blackhawks are going to prioritize their young players, as they should. But one thing that I've really learned since covering this show is that injuries happen in hockey, man, and you can never really expect them to happen. You can never really expect them not to happen at the same point in time. It's just something that you're going to have to deal with. And the Blackhawks these last couple of years have been on the wrong side of the injury bug. So you never know when you're going to have to call someone up from down in Rockford and go jump into the lineup. And I feel like Zach Sanford is a more than competent guy to come up from Rockford, fill a spot in the lineup from time to time, and also someone who, if you use him as an extra forward at the NHL level, you're not really going to feel bad about healthy scratching him for like a 2 or 3 week stretch. You know what Zach Sanford is at this time? He's going to turn 30 years old in the fall, right? He's kind of a little bit of a tweener. He's either a 4th liner at the NHL or probably a top 6 guy in the AHL. But I like that diversity. I like that ability for him to fill multiple roles in this organization. And also, one thing you need to consider, down in Rockford, David Gust, Luke Philp, and Rem Pitlick are all going to be UFAs this summer. They're going to have their own control under where they go. So I think the odds that you bring back all 3 of those guys are very slim. So it was probably smart here from the Blackhawks organization to go and be proactive and bring back a guy like Sanford. So, you have someone coming back who was in your organization for a little bit last year and has experience at both the NHL and the AHL level and can be one of those veterans to help the youngsters develop and take that next step. So you can never have too many of those guys around. And this was a good 2-way contract, easy to bring Sanford up and down, costs well less than $1 million. I just think it was a smart move by the Blackhawks organization. Again, it's not going to catch any headlines. It's not going to be notable news to anyone or even some Blackhawks fans. I'm sure most of you probably don't even care about this, but I do think it was a smart little signing by Kyle Davidson. I don't know if we're even going to see Zach Sanford at the NHL level next year, but that doesn't mean he can't have an impact on this organization. Like I said, if we lose one of David Gust or Luke Philp. That's a huge hole in the Blackhawks or in the Ice Hogs forward group. And Rem Pitlick was also huge after the Hawks acquired him from Pittsburgh. So they're going to need some veteran guys likely to fill in a role or two down there. And I think Zach Sanford is a natural fit to fill that role and also be someone who can competently come up to the NHL, play in a bottom six role if the Blackhawks need him, or just to be an extra forward on the NHL roster. All right, that is going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for tuning into the show. Be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free if you haven't done so already. And also, make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Blackhawks YouTube channel. Even if you're someone who regularly tunes in through an audio platform, please make sure you subscribe to the channel. It won't cost you anything, and it really does help me out tremendously. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can find me on X at Jack Bushman2. Make sure to also go and check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey. That way you can get all of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until the next episode, I am going to have an episode come out tomorrow, Blackhawks fans. Enjoy the rest of your Fridays. Everyone, be safe, be responsible. I'll see you tomorrow on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.